Neil, and if you want to be punchy and informative, you've asked the wrong moderator here. We will certainly be punchy and and informative, I hope. And good morning, everybody, both to the distinguished panelists and to everybody tuning in this morning. I'm glad Neil said that this is an asking questions and showing where to get information session rather than answers, because I can tell you in the small bit of research I've done in advance of this morning, I've realised how little I know, and I'm supposed to be a financial journalist, but it's obviously of much more import to you as SMEs out there. And also, for once, I'm slightly glad that we are on Zoom today, because coming out of News Talk this morning, I spilled a whole cup of coffee down over my sparkling white shirt, so apologies for that. Without further ado, I think in order of that we've decided on, we might ask Katie to talk to us first. I have a little bell here. After 5 minutes, we're giving you 6 minutes each, folks, as panelists. After 5 minutes, I'll press my bell. If you're still talking at that stage, and you might try and wrap up as well as you can, then we'll obviously bring you back in for questions. But Katie, if we could start with you, the current situation in terms of the Northern Ireland protocol and how that affects businesses exporting from both the Republic and Northern Ireland into GB, and sometimes through Northern Ireland into GB, if you could.
Great. Thanks very much, Vincent. Thank you, Neil, for the invitation. It's lovely to be here with you this morning. Yes, so I'm going to concentrate primarily on what happens around the Irish border, focusing on the protocol. As Neil says, there's an awful lot of speculation about deal, no deal, etc. And I think the main message I'd want to get across to you this morning is that we can be quite reassured that all signs are, ignore the political rhetoric, all signs are that the protocol will be implemented. That is the fundamental foundation upon which we can imagine that things will work come the 1st of January. We've seen a lot of speculation around the UK Internal Market Bill. I'm happy to answer any questions on that, and the threat of the UK to breach the protocol. But the fundamental point is that actually none of that makes any sense unless fundamentally the UK is intending to implement the protocol. And most particularly, we see this in evidence. So we've seen the UK government invest hundreds of millions of pounds already in what is necessary to implement the protocol. We've seen progress being made on the border control posts in Northern Ireland, and we've seen statutory instruments begin to be being laid down, and all signs are that this is the intention. Now, in terms of practicalities, in terms of efficiencies, there's some concerns there, but fundamentally that's the legal framework within which we'll be working. So that gives us some reassurance, because it means for movements of goods between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland come the 1st of January and going forward, nothing will be any different. Fundamentally, the idea is that goods from Northern Ireland will be in free circulation in the European Union, and goods from the south and elsewhere in the EU can freely circulate in Northern Ireland. There's no need for customs declarations, any checks, any change in procedures in that regard. If there is no deal between the UK and the EU, that does make a bit of a difference, but primarily in relation to services and in relation to workers. There are kind of backup mechanisms around the details of the protocol and the withdrawal agreement that will allow some bilateral arrangements to patch over any urgent issues that arise in the event of a no deal. So again, that's some reassurance. Now, on goods moving from the island of Ireland into GB, there's basically this commitment that the UK government has made for unfettered access. And this means that goods coming from Northern Ireland directly into Great Britain won't go through any changes. Now, there's a bit of a debate around whether there'll be exit summary declarations. We still have yet to see that clarified. But fundamentally, we've noted that the UK government has defined Northern Ireland goods that would qualify for unfettered access into GB, going directly from Northern Ireland ports into GB. And that includes everything in free circulation in Northern Ireland. So that will include goods from the south. And although there will be an anti-avoidance regime coming in at some point, fundamentally, the UK government is prioritizing flow over controls, certainly when it comes to accessing its ports from Northern Ireland. So again, with some exceptions on those goods that we'd already expect to have some controls over, we're basically expecting to see goods continuing to move as they are already. Goods going from Northern Ireland or from the south into GB via Dublin or other ports into GB that way. We will be expecting to see customs controls. We know what is to be expected, and my colleagues will discuss that in a moment about leaving the island of Ireland into GB. What happens when you get into GB is another matter. And again, the priority there is flow rather than control. And we've seen slow progress being made in relation to preparation for that. And even in Holyhead, we know there are plans to have some green lanes, for example, but that's slow to being built. And the UK government has given itself 6 months of a run-in time. So even on SPS goods, we won't be seeing any checks, physical checks and inspections will be away from border control posts. They're basically at point of destination. So we have until, it's basically, they're giving themselves until the 1st of July for full implementation of those customs checks and controls. Whether that will happen is yet to be seen. But essentially, that's the main message I want to get across to you today, that fundamentally the protocol will be implemented, and this means goods moving across the island of Ireland as they are already, and goods moving from Northern Ireland directly into GB are benefiting from unfettered access.
Okay, Katie, and well done on the time. I didn't have to go for the bell at all there. Thank you for that contribution, and we'll be getting questions to you when we hear from the other panellists. Okay, next up is Dave Flynn, Executive Director of SkillNet Ireland, and our sponsor this morning, to talk to us principally about the Clear Customs training course. Dave.
That's great, Vincent. Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. SkillNet Ireland is very proud to sponsor today's event, folks. We're a business support agency, and we're dedicated to workforce development in Ireland. We support over 18,000 businesses throughout Ireland each year, and we upskill 70,000 workers. And of course, businesses are looking to manage their costs, folks. They're looking to look for new opportunities, to look for new customers, and they're looking to adapt with and cope with COVID and other challenges, and of course, with the likes of Brexit. And notwithstanding comments that the previous contributor, Katie, has made around that emphasis on flow over control, which I think is really important. There is this challenge, folks, that when goods reach customs, that if there are delays due to inaccurate or incomplete documentation, that can cause disruption for companies and for businesses. So in those circumstances, it's important that staff within SMEs are trained to handle those customs declarations appropriately. And I suppose one key way to do that, folks, is through the Clear Customs initiative, that program, Vincent, that you mentioned. Clear Customs is a virtual program. It's a free program that's available to businesses, be they customs intermediaries or be they SMEs themselves who export to or through the UK. It's offered via a web-based app and access to live lectures, because obviously I understand everybody's concern. Of course, we all have folks around live-based training at the moment, so it's all done remotely. And there's a great opportunity there for companies who want to participate in that program over the weeks ahead. Many hundreds of companies are already making their way through Clear Customs as we speak. We're getting great feedback on it in terms of how intuitive the program is, and people get access to live lectures, to people with talks of experience in the customs space. You can chat to them about the implications of Brexit and customs declarations from the point of view of their specific industry and sector. As well as that, there's scenarios, there's videos, there's lots of different ways for people to learn and to pick up key pieces of information, key nuggets in relation to customs declarations. So I suppose what I'd say to people is that program is free, and just to restate that. And in terms of the focus and who it's aimed at, really it's aimed at people who have any interaction in terms of trading with or through the UK, be they a customs intermediary, a freight forwarding company, or an SME themselves. Now, obviously for SMEs, if you already have an arrangement in place with a freight forwarder or with a customs intermediary services provider to ensure that your customs declarations are completed from the 1st of January onwards, then in those circumstances, of course, folks, it's not necessary to complete and participate in Clear Customs. But if you don't have those things in place, then now is an important time to put that action in place and to participate in the likes of Clear Customs it'll give you that in-house capacity, that in-house skill set to be able to complete those declarations, and just gives that level of comfort and assurance that things will be minimized in terms of disruption from the 1st of January onwards. And aside from clear customs, there are lots of other ways that businesses want to upskill at this time to support companies around the broader Brexit issue, whether it's to do with finding new customers or retaining customers. And they can do that, folks, through the 70 Skill at Ireland networks nationwide, including ISME SkillNet. And if they want to find new customers and retain existing ones, there are lots of programs out there heavily subsidized in areas like digital marketing, sales, selling internationally, customer experience and customer service. If they want to make sure that their business is lean and being run on a very efficient basis, and I'm sure that is the case, folks, but just in terms of margins and areas for improvement, there are lots of programs out there in terms of operational effectiveness, lean, and so on, and supply chain management, procurement, just to name a few. So I suppose it was just important for me, folks. Again, we're delighted to sponsor today's event, but it was just important for me just to point out that there are lots of opportunities out there, lots of very practical supports, training and upskilling opportunities through many agencies, and of course through Skill at Ireland. So thank you for that.
Thanks indeed, Dave, for that overview, and particularly about the availability of clear customs, and people should avail of that now. Next up is Giles O'Neill, Manager of the Brexit Unit at Enterprise Ireland, to outline to us, I suppose, the specific supports that both financial and advisory that Enterprise Ireland has in place for Brexit, and indeed other supports. Giles.
Thank you, Vincent, and hopefully I won't be the one that gets that bell rung at me.
You've all been very good so far.
We are living and working in extremely challenging times, and if somebody could come in and wave a magic wand, a stabilization wand, I think we'd have it. It's really testing us, and I want to recognize that. Our ability to be flexible and innovative and resilient. I'm dealing with a lot of companies that are facing these challenges, as I'm sure many of the people on the webinar this morning are. But I have to say that despite everything that's going on, there's still a level of confidence in exporting companies that is quite remarkable. We recently had our virtual IMW, International Markets Week, and we did a survey around that of 700 companies. 33% of them had seen a drop in exports for 2020. 33% had remained the same, and 33% had grown. And 57% expected growth in 2021. Now, if you look at the Purchasing Managers Index data, so this is for all companies in Ireland, that dropped in September quite significantly, showing a drop in confidence. And your own data, ISME's data for September, did show a drop in confidence level as well. It's very volatile, it's fragile, and COVID and Brexit together, it's not helping. So what do you do as a business with limited resources and with all these things coming at you? The first thing to say is don't panic. Take a breath if you can, and decide on and take advice on those issues that are absolutely critical to the ongoing business, your ongoing business operations. And when I was asked to come and speak this morning, I just thought, well, what's the simple message? And really what I think you should try and do is to write these critical issues down under two headings. The first heading is selling, and the second heading is buying. Okay, and I'm going to cut to the chase on this. There's a stack of advice, really, really good advice on things that you have to do to prepare for Brexit. You know, one of them, just as an example, is Carol Lynch's from BDO, the 8 steps of to get Brexit ready. I'm happy to send that on to people so they have it at the top of their email if they'd like. But even 8 steps sounds a little bit daunting. So if you go back to the selling and buying, those two columns, if you are selling into GB goods now, if you're selling to GB, ask yourself the question, who is going to do the customs declarations for you? You need to decide, you need to look at the numbers, you need to look at the data you need. Derek will talk about this in a second, the 56 points of data that you need, and look how easy or not easy it is to get that data. And to see who within your business should take responsibility for that. And going back to Dave's point, you know, have they been trained? There's great supports out there, you know, from the likes of SkillNet, from the Leos, to get that support if you need it. Now, I've heard it a lot. my distributor, my freight forwarding company, my customs intermediary company, they will do it for me. That's great. That's great. In many ways, they are best positioned to do it. They will have a lot of the data that is required. But if it is the case, please, please, please have that conversation with them. Give them your tariff classification codes and ensure that they are geared up to do it. If they haven't taken on additional resources to do it, if they haven't redeployed resources to do it, you need reassurance. You need an agreement, a timeline. You don't want delays and you don't want unhappy customers at the end of the day. And it's the same for receiving goods. A lot of questions came up on this before the webinar. Receiving your goods into the UK, who has responsibility for that? The importation side of the goods that you send off the island of Ireland. Have you had that conversation with your customers? Your freight forwarder, logistics, customs person, company, they may offer that service for you. And if they do, great, but just be clear on the costs associated with doing that. And it's the same for buying and importing product. The same questions, but just in reverse. In terms of supports, very quickly, Enterprise Ireland, they've just launched its the Brexit Readiness Checker. And I'm happy to circulate one for everybody in the audience, and I can put it in the chat function once I get off. And this is really designed to see if you were ready. A simple set of 32 questions around each area of Brexit exposure. It produces a customized report for you, your business, based on the inputs that the answer to the questions that you've given. It produces a list of things to get done and directs you towards resources to help you do them. I'll paste that into the chat link in a second. Local enterprise offices, a huge range of supports available. You just need to ask, get somebody in your business to ask. High-level intro to customs, the SkillNet has been mentioned, lunch and learn sessions, Brexit mentors, advisors. And of course, you've got your own great network, the ISME network. You know, I'm conscious of the fact that you're bombarded with help. It's part of our job, and I'm sorry, but we're going to keep doing it because one of the objectives I have is to try and get as many businesses as possible ready before January the 1st. Groups of like-minded importers, distributors, you know somebody that's done things particularly well, you know somebody that is well organized, talk to each other and don't be afraid to ask. And in terms of Enterprise Ireland, we've been given 20 million to invest in companies to build that customs clearance capacity. If your third-party provider hasn't taken people on, direct them towards us. We have Brexit expertise, and to be honest, the 20 million, the expertise available to help you through these various different issues. A lot of it, it's getting close now to January 21st, and it just requires action, and the action needs to be taken, and it needs to be taken by you. Thanks, Vincent.
Thanks indeed, Giles. I was just checking the bell to see that it worked there. Well done. And that information I see already up on the links to Enterprise Ireland's Brexit checker there already up on the Zoom group chat, which is very useful indeed, just for further information. Okay, next up is Derek Dunn, Customs Compliance Manager at Manifest Ireland. This is a man at the forefront of what actually has to happen in terms of practicalities for exporting and importing firms. And I suspect you're going to be taking a fair few of the questions later, Derek, but you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. And Giles, thank you very much for getting the bell. That takes the pressure off me totally, so I can just carry on. So first and foremost, I'm a customs broker. I'm engaged in doing customs clearances for goods that are coming from China, Japan, Korea, all of the third countries that the EU trade with. So I suppose there's no surprises for us in what's going to be involved in the customs process. One of the difficulties in making customs declarations is it's a very exact science. Customs are looking for specific information in specific formats, and it is legally binding. So really the panel reflects today with the amount of support and training that's available to get people up to speed and to make the decisions if they want to make their own customs declarations or not. And that's one I'd ask you to consider. There's a business plan to be done depending on the volume you need to do and everything else, but make sure you get your people trained and make them aware, because the fortunate position we're in, we're doing them on a daily basis, but this is going to happen on the 1st of January. And it's got to be done, and it's got to be done right from day one. Revenue have introduced a number of different kind of easements and trade facilitations for entering and exiting the ports like Dublin and Rosslare, and they will add to the piece and help the flow. But as Katie mentioned earlier on, easement is the UK's focus. But from the EU's perspective, we've got the rules and regulations. We know exactly what we need to do. It's laid out in the Union Customs Code, and we need to work within those parameters. So that's what I mean by there's no surprises for us in what's required for those of us that are engaged in that. And I recognize that there's a lot of people who aren't engaged in that. A couple of kind of things to look at, and maybe if I can share with you some of the difficulties which our importers have on a daily basis, and which will definitely reflect across. One of them is EORI numbers, Economic Operator Registered Index. So you've got ISME Limited, ISME and Associates, ISME Enterprises, all maybe the same group, or maybe different businesses. The EORI number identifies exactly who the business entity is. And that's why it's really important in making customs declarations. One of the difficulties we have today, businesses aren't registered for their EORI number, and it delays the process. So make sure and check that you've got an EORI number. Generally, it's your VAT number with IE in front of it. Do something as simple as Google EORI validation and put your IE and your VAT number in, and it will tell you whether you're registered or not. If you're not, on to ROS, do it through ROS online. It's a very simple process, and make sure that you now have your customs identity. And that's a really, really important piece. So if you take nothing away from today, but you check that EORI validation, that would be really worthwhile. I've noticed of interest in some of the comments where it looks like exporters are more prepared than importers. And exporters, certainly for leaving the island of Ireland, have probably got the easier task insofar as there's no taxes or duties liable. Hopefully there will be a trade agreement and duties won't be an issue, but VAT will be an issue. So whereas today we trade business to business with the UK, we don't pay the VAT, but we do account for it. But now there will be a requirement to pay the VAT. There's an expectation that this can be done through your VAT return, but we're waiting to hear from government on that. And we just got to wait and see how that one plays out. And there may also be the potential for needing to have a customs guarantee to avail for that. So just think of your cash flow and the potential of having to pay VAT up front in doing imports. The other one again, which was touched on, and I just want to elaborate a little bit more, I want to talk about Incoterms. So Giles mentioned, make sure that you know who's doing what in the process. Incoterms are a really useful tool for doing that. It's something that hasn't been required really for European trade. It's very commonplace for international trade. You'll have heard terms like Ex-Works. A lot of you are going to come across where your suppliers are telling you in the UK, we want goods delivered on DDP terms, delivered duty paid. But what those Incoterms do is they lay out the responsibility for each party in the sale. And it gives a very, very clear and concise picture on that. So make sure that you start to introduce and agree Incoterms with your buyers and with your sellers so you know who's responsible for what. When it comes to appointing your customs broker, if that's what you choose to do some due diligence on them. Make sure that they're competent and they know what they're doing, because you're the one ultimately who's responsible for your customs declarations. So again, make sure that they've got the correct tariff codes, they've got the correct information, and that they employ that. In addition to doing your due diligence on them, have a look at the timescales. Talk to your transport providers, see what their capacity is, what they will be looking for. So in the case of exports, the expectation is that you will do an export declaration prior to the departure of the goods. So revenue have their opportunity to do their due diligence on it and do their risk analysis and everything else. And likewise for imports, and this is where it's really going to be challenging, the import declaration needs to be made prior to the truck leaving the United Kingdom. So in other words, before he's allowed on the ferry, your import declaration must be done. And that again is going to be challenge for information. Sorry, Giles, there's two of us now. That's where that supply of information is going to be really, really important. So talk to your suppliers, talk to your logistics providers, talk to your customs brokers, and make sure they have all of the relevant information that you need them to have. Thanks very much, Vincent.
That's great, Derek. Thanks indeed. And I'm sure we'll be back to you with some of the questions that have come in already. And finally, last but not least, indeed, and I found this particular site very helpful myself. Paul McMahon of McMahon Legal, an experienced solicitor and tax advisor, and a specialist, I have to say, in all sorts of issues relating to Brexit and what's going to happen in practical terms, including customs, VAT, and regulations and certification. Paul, your 6 minutes starts from now.
Good morning. I'll start my own timer. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Vincent kindly mentioned Brexit and Irish Guide. It's something I've worked on over the last couple of years. I've done an awful lot of work in the area, but I've tried to compile the public information from Britain, UK and Ireland into one place and categorise it. And I've continued to do that because there is quite a lot of information. So I've been asked to speak about it. A couple of small points, net points, and really the impact of WTO for SMEs. Quick look at standards and certifications issues. So I suppose the big issue, agreement, deal, no deal, I want to make a couple of points about it. In one sense, there's not a lot of difference compared with where we are at the moment. The EU is a very, very close relationship. It's the one country virtually for trade purposes to the EU, but that will change. So we're going to a position quite different. But that said, there is quite a difference between a deal and no deal. And I think the main difference is really will be around the political atmosphere as much as the technical content. Katie mentioned the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think that's going to be much more challenging if there's no deal. There may be recriminations. In parallel, the EU is looking at the recognition of UK's data protection laws at the moment. It's technically unrelated to the negotiations, but you can imagine that will be a bit more difficult if there's no deal. And generally, there's the possibility of facilitations. There's recognition agreements and all kinds of ad hoc facilitations. I think in a no-deal situation, they'll be more difficult. I suppose for a lot of the points effectively have already been mentioned. Derek mentioned there's customs no matter what. So the customs returns processes both on the UK and Irish side, both on import and exports, will apply in every single case. Obviously, the main difference with a deal is duties prospectively apply in some sectors. And in that, the rule book, obviously, it applies both in importing into Ireland. In there, the rule book is the European tariff, which sets out the rules, the duties that apply, and the actual other, it sets out most other possible licenses and rules that apply. So that's your Bible on that. And businesses should, all these cases, businesses need to look at their own particular individual circumstances. On the other side, there's a very interesting change. The UK has unilaterally introduced a global tariff that will apply to all its trade in 2021, and that should be consulted by anyone importing into the UK and exporting from Ireland, because the UK has reduced a lot of tariffs. It's got rid of what is called nuisance tariffs. There's still very significant tariff on food and animal products, but a lot of the lower tariffs have been removed. So I would say to businesses, while you're importing and exporting goods, that's your Bible. Look at the tariff on the EU side, which is TARIC, and you'll find it very easily. And on the UK side, look at the global tariff that the UK is unilaterally introduced. There's been 3 of them. This is a little bit different to the other ones. I'd like to mention services too. There's less likely to be a deal on services in either situation, because where we're at the moment, we're going towards a very thin deal, possibly only a deal that can be dealt with by the European Union. A more comprehensive deal would require ratification by all the parliaments, might be possible. But if you're in the services sector, which obviously so many people are, it may not affect you. Number one thing you need to look at is regulation. Are you in a business? Are you relying on a qualification or a regulation or license from the other jurisdiction, from UK and Ireland, or vice versa? That's critical. It'll only apply in a handful of positions. Financial services, most of those businesses have taken care of themselves a long time ago, but it also applies in transport and a couple of other little areas. Data protection, movement of personal data is an issue. It applies both in goods and services, but as I mentioned, at the moment, the EU is assessing the UK rules. So if there aren't, if there's no assessment before the end of the year, you need to put in place extra agreements between the senders and recipients of personal data to protect the third parties. Another big theme, the UK for its part is saying that it will allow in EU data without restriction. Very important thing is on the transition website, the UK is hard to find because it's not called Brexit anymore, but if you look at transition guidance notes, there's lots and lots of sectoral guidance from the UK government. And in that, there's a lot of concessions. So they're pulling back from what the position may be. And I'll mention in a moment regarding conformity assessment. They're giving little lead-in times. There's a big theme is Ireland's bound by the EU rules, their law, their EU law. We have to implement them as they are. But the UK is allowing a little bit more flexibility. Derek mentioned there's a lead-in time for the full customs control as well on the UK side. I just lastly, before the bell, I want to mention conformity of goods. If there's an agreement, there's some scope for improvement of recognition of good standards. But I think in this case, if you're importing goods that are certified in the UK into Ireland, you're going to have to talk to your manufacturer or your distributor, or whoever you're buying from in the UK, to see that they will be compliant to put those goods in the market after the end of the year, because UK conformity assessment bodies won't be recognised. There's rules for goods in circulation at the year end and stock and so on, but there are situations where part of the whole risk assessment around all the certification of good standards involves notified bodies. It's different. There's 32 different directives: machinery, electrical goods, construction products, etc. But in those, a UK conformity assessment body may play a role. And if that changes, you would expect your manufacturer or distributor to have dealt with that and to get an alternative one. Okay, I'm just finishing up. 2 points on the on importing goods. If you are the UK if you're the EU importer, you have extra responsibilities. Just to explain, if you're importing from the UK at the moment, that's just a purchase within the EU. But under EU law in relation to products, defective products, both civil liability and callback and defective products, where you're the EU importer, you have much higher responsibilities than when you're not, effectively. So you may become the EU importer in certain cases. Anyone in that sector needs to look at their particular position. And I'll take any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thanks indeed, Paul, and I'm sure that there are some here for you, absolutely. Thank you to all the panellists, and we'll move quickly. I have a couple of questions. I'll intersperse a couple of my questions with, and more importantly, get as many as possible questions that you've already submitted and those that you want to submit as we listen. Katie, I know you have a hard exit at 12, so forgive my ignorance on this, and I'm wearing my simple journalistic hat here. As I heard you talk at the start, that the good news about the Northern Ireland Protocol is that there will be no change to goods as distinct from services going either way across the border, and then exports to Britain from Northern Ireland will be unfettered. Would that make sense for exporters in the Republic who currently export directly from the Republic to Great Britain, perhaps to channel some of their goods through Northern Ireland and thereby avoid some of the customs? Am I getting this wrong? Will goods from the Republic going through Northern Ireland into Britain have the same customs and regulatory restrictions as those going directly from the Republic to Britain?
So, so there are two phases, as I understand it, that the UK government is working with now, in terms of managing the unfettered access. So this phase one is basically everything in free circulation in Northern Ireland, present in Northern Ireland in free circulation, counts as having qualifying status for unfettered access into GB if it's going direct. And that's what this secondary legislation that's coming forward says. As I mentioned, they're going to be bringing in, we're told, anti-avoidance regime to try and minimize, I guess, the greatest risks of people obviously using that as a backdoor into GB. But as I say, even if we look at what they're doing in the border operating model, GB to EU, it is prioritizing flow. So yes, if you're, I mean, I'm not obviously going to encourage this.
Not encouraging it, of course.
But if you're in the south and you're wanting to access GB, then you won't have restrictions going from. You'd have far fewer. You won't have obviously import declarations or any of that, or export declarations if you're going via Northern Ireland into. But that's not. It's not like the legal route to do it, obviously.
No,
but
absolutely.
Fundamentally, there won't be restrictions going directly.
I'm not encouraging that, but I just wanted to clarify, because that's what I took from what you were saying in terms of what the current GB position is. So let's just stick that one away for a while.
I mean, I should say phase two we've been promised will have much more detail, because for a long time, as you can imagine, people in Northern Ireland have been pressing for, well, what is a qualifying status? And apparently we'll have a range of then definitions that would be more sectorally specific, as you can imagine, for Northern Ireland businesses themselves not to be undercut or whatever.
Are there any implications then, as we know it now, for whether there's either primary or intermediary production in a product either side of the border? Take primary milk coming south to be processed into cheese, perhaps going back to be manufactured to something else across the border. We know Guinness sends liquid stout up north to be canned and maybe come back again. Those kind of transits in the actual production process going back and forth across the border. Will there be any change there?
No, so this is really, I think, why we have this phase 1 and phase 2, because it became so complicated to try and allow for those intermediary processes, and the fact that it's so complicated to define what is an NI good per se. So I think this is just a sort of stopgap arrangement, just to say, well, everything that's processed in Northern Ireland, on the island of Ireland, that we don't get into any of that detail. We just try to keep goods moving as freely as possible from NI into GB. There is a the flip side of that is that we do, as has been very clearly spelled out, we do have customs processes going from the Republic into GB, and we haven't yet got clarification on. In fact, the default position is that goods coming from Northern Ireland, or even those obviously that are maybe part of it comes from Northern Ireland, and then the final product is made in the south, and then it goes through into GB. I mean, they will be subject, as it looks at the moment, to customs control. So there's no unfettered access, obviously, from
coming to the Republic.
Yeah, even if it's goods that are wholly produced in Northern Ireland and just happen to be using Dublin port, as we know is often the case for many goods, that's the case.
Okay, thanks indeed, Dave. That's very clear. Dave, Skillnet Ireland, if I could come to you. Most of our audience are SMEs and will have different volumes of import and export activity with the UK. Would you advise everybody, regardless of what volume of imports or exports they have, whether they are using a freight forwarder or customs intermediary firm, to do that clear customs course, just to get absolutely up to speed on what's changing now?
I would advise people to do that, Vincent, and I suppose just going back to the point I made earlier on, if they have clear arrangements in place, freight forwarders and so on, with customs intermediaries, it's not an absolute requirement. Of course, it's not. But I think that both Giles and other contributors have made that point. Are we clear? Are you very clear as an SME that your freight forwarding partner understands the minutiae of your business, etc.? And nobody understands it like you as an SME business owner. And for the sake of 10 hours of commitment, so the entire program delivered over 5 weeks is a 10-hour commitment in total. I think it just gives people that greater power and knowledge, because they've gone through the program, they understand the mechanics of it, and on that basis then are better able to deal with even customs intermediary agents on their behalf, because they have that inside knowledge and insight into what's involved.
And is there any backlog to get onto that course, Dave, or can people, if they sign on, get onto it pretty quickly?
People can get onto it immediately, Vincent, absolutely. So there's within the app that's been developed specifically for Clear Customs, there are a series of dates for the live lectures and all of the other materials that people need. And because it's been delivered virtually, there's a huge amount of capacity and opportunities for people. But obviously it is a 5-week commitment, and with 2 months to go to the 1st of January, I suppose I would just urge people to take that step now, sooner rather than later.
I'm coming to you, Giles, Enterprise Ireland. We know one of the supports that was made available through recently by the government, the July stimulus, was a €9,000 grant towards the cost of either training somebody to work on the customs arrangement within house or to get outside advice. It's not a black and white issue, I know, but is there any volume of trading that a company might be doing either in or out of the UK that you would recommend that you would try and scale up on the expertise that you have in-house?
Good question. Derek is probably better at answering the volume of trading in terms of the technical aspect. But again, to answer it from the experience, we launched this on the 9th of September, right? So we've currently have over 150 people, companies that have applied for support. That's a real mixture of importers, distributors, small companies, and a lot of freight forwarders, logistics companies as well. And again, probably evidence is probably the best way of answering that question. Where people are putting in the most in terms of resource to support Irish business come January 1 that is in the freight, logistics, customs intermediary sector. It is complicated. If I were in a small business, I would think very long and hard about whether I want to do that myself. And the point I tried to make earlier, whether I'm in a good position to do that myself or to get somebody else to do it who has more of the data that is required, which often is a freight forwarder logistics specialist.
Okay, fair enough. I think I know which side of the fence I'd be on. It sounds quite complex, certainly in the initial months, just the changes people will face. I assume, and it's one of the questions I wanted to come to you with, Derek. Obviously, this is going to be a big change for a lot of companies, both exporting and importing to the UK. What has been a seamless process up to now because they were a fellow member country. It does sound complex without wishing to put people off. But do you believe that, you know, over the course of 2021, people will get much more used to the thing, that a lot of the declarations that will need to be made are repetitive, and secondly, that a lot of what can be done will be automated over time?
Yeah, 2 points there, Vincent. One is the automation piece. There definitely is scope for doing that. I would say this as a customs broker, but I also feel that the human intervention is critical, because if we over automate the process, we repeat the same mistake again, and we end up with a difficulty in doing that. And then in general, it really depends on the business. If I'm exporting the same product from the UK, and I'm using one single commodity code for doing that, well, then I've got reasonably straightforward declarations to do, and it certainly is something that's manageable. I guess the business plan that needs to be done is how much am I going to have to pay a third party to do it, versus what would be the cost of me taking it on board myself and taking it into the business. On the import side, it's a little bit more complex because we're looking at taxes and calculations of taxes, etc. So again, you know, depending on product, if you're bringing the same product in time and time again, you can kind of create a reasonable template into doing that. But if you're bringing in multiple products with shifting potential, an example, some of the discount retail stores, you're bringing everything from buckets and mops to paper clips and everything else. You're looking at a huge amount of commodity codes. So it's really specific to your business. But by being aware and knowing what the requirement is and having an introduction to that through clear customs, the more knowledge you can get, the better you're placed to make that decision.
And obviously our audience today, members of ISME, are SMEs. So in some cases, the volumes won't be huge as yet, perhaps hopefully they'll grow. But where does the trusted trader come in then, in the sense that, you know, if there are audits over time, this trusted trader facility, is that purely based on the scale of trade that a company might be doing, or can you become a trusted trader even if you're a relatively small trader?
Absolutely. Trusted traders can be from single person business entities right up to the multinationals. AEO, authorized economic operator, is the EU version of that. And effectively what it is it's revenue coming in and looking at your supply chain and looking at your customs declarations and satisfying themselves that you're doing it to a standard. And once you achieve that standard, then you can be entitled to certain derogations in the customs process, depending on the type of business. But one of the main ones that's there in some of the guarantees that you require for customs, they can give you a reduction or a waiver by virtue of the fact that you're in AEO. That's an ongoing continuous assessment that happens. And it certainly is, from a commercial point of view, it's well worth having, but it is time consuming and it does take up a lot of time and effort. Certainly a couple of projects I've been involved in, 9 months minimum to get AEO. Okay,
so not for the immediate couple of months of the change after January by any means.
No, definitely not.
Or specific questions that I think are aimed at either yourself or Paul, Derek. There's a couple of questions, and it's obviously reflecting somebody who's on the webinar about steel. I don't know whether there's anything different about steel as distinct from any other product, but what are the implications of raw material steel imported from a UK supplier, or what are the implications of steel used in the manufacturing of an item which is then exported back to the UK as a finished product? Is there something specific about steel, or will it have the same restrictions and customs regulations as any other product?
Yeah, I'd refer you very quickly to the trade war that's happening between the EU and the US and China, and steel has been a big focus. So a lot of steel coming into Europe is subject to quotas, limits on the amount that can come in. And if the EU go out without a trade deal, they will be subject to those limits. So I think that's where the focus is coming in there on the limits of the steel that might be coming in. You touched then on steel coming in, being manufactured into a product and going back out again. We're getting to origin there of the goods, and generally, as a rule of thumb, an origin law, and Paul will give you a much better insight into this than I can, but generally as a rule of thumb, if you change a product or an article sufficiently to change its commodity code, well, then the origin changes with it. So if I bring steel in and I turn it into a washing machine, well, then it's an Irish washing machine because I've manufactured it in Ireland. So again, that piece, sending products out to the UK, getting them processed and coming back in. There is a number of different customs authorizations. You can look at doing that outward processing. But again, that's something that you want to have a look at quite closely and get some good advice on.
Is there any rule of thumb on that, Paul, in terms of, and I think a lot of companies will be engaged in this, taking in raw materials from the UK, doing some sort of a manufacturing process and perhaps sending some of the finished product back to the UK as one of their markets. Is there any rule of thumb there in terms of where the balance of duties lie?
The actual rules will be in the trade agreement, if there is a trade agreement. If there's no trade agreement, unfortunately, origin won't matter because you're going to have the WTO tariffs. But there's various different concepts. There's a notion of substantial transformation. There's different tests, and the people say 50, 60, 70% of value, but it's quite complex. And the part of the trade agreements that deal with this run to 80, 90, 100 pages. So it might be very particular to the product, and there might be very specific rules for particular types of products, as well as general definitions. But hopefully if there's an agreement, it'll be less of an issue. Origin will be important to some extent, but it is particular to the circumstances to look at what the particular rules are.
I might get you to expand, Paul, a little bit on because I know I rushed you towards the end there, on the whole certification issue and standards protocols, because I know a lot of companies will be importing perhaps one raw material or one element of what they sell on here in the Republic of Ireland from the UK with a UK standard certification. What needs to change there now?
Well, I suppose the main change is that the UK manufacturer or supplier needs to ensure that they have an EU certifier where they need it. I mean, basically, the EU regulates about 60 or 70% of all products with particular requirements. As I said, it's about 32 different directives. So it would differ between construction products and medicine and electrical equipment and so on. But each of those have their own safety protocol. Now, there's a certain amount of self-certification. There's quite a lot. There might be a prototype, and every time the goods are sold, there's a declaration that it conforms with that or with a particular standard. But in a lot of those rules, in a lot of those regulations and directives, there's a requirement for a standards body, a national standards body that each state has. After December, UK standards bodies won't count as EU standards bodies. So you would expect that your manufacturer would have ensured that it is relying on a EU certifier instead. As I say, usefully the UK, and this is a theme with quite a lot of things, it's saying in the detailed guidance for different types, but in some cases it's saying that it'll allow another year, it'll allow in EU products for another year based on EU certification without getting the UK certification, although that will ultimately be necessary. But
in practical terms, if you're importing a finished product or else some sort of elements of what you need, in practical terms, the UK certification will need to change to CE, and you may need to pay for a standardization body here in Ireland to certify that the product is properly certified under EU regulations.
It depends where you are in the whole chain. I mean, if you're more of a manufacturer, possibly, but you would expect if you're just buying the finished product that your suppliers in the UK would have dealt with that issue. But you need to have the conversation to ensure that they are dealing with it.
Okay. Back to you, Derek, I think, and maybe you as well, Paul. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not certain. Can any customs or tariff duty be reclaimed?
No is the short answer.
They are
it's a
taxes, aren't they?
In the unlikely event that goods are returned back out, maybe faulty or an error or something like that, there is a refund process. But no, but essentially it's a taxation on import.
Okay, bad news. Even I thought I knew the answer to that, but good to clarify it. I think this might be for yourself, Paul, maybe Derek again. For a medical company with suppliers in the UK, what things should I expect Brexit to change? Same as
Okay.
we've been talking about effectively, is it?
Okay, there's quite a lot of guidance on that. The UK has published quite a lot of guidance, and as the EU have, it goes back to that standards. Like medical is such a broad term. There's actual drugs and there's medical devices and so on. They're all very regulated by EU regulations and standards. So you just need to look very precisely at what applies to the particular type of medical product concerned. The UK has published quite a lot of guidance, and that guidance is both relevant on the coming in side for selling into the UK and on the export side, because they're saying to their own domestic producers what you have to do to sell into the EU. And equally, it says what the UK concessions might be. So typically the theme is the UK is giving concessions for a period, but you need to look very, very precisely. That's such a technical area. There's so many people involved. You would have to understand precisely what product or drug is involved and look at it. There's an awful lot of guidance, and the UK has published dozens of guidance notes in the last couple of weeks about that.
And off the top of your head, Paul, do you know where people should begin to look for that kind of information?
Well, the broad places to look are the EU has a Readiness section on its website. The EU Commission has Readiness, and it publishes about 300 different either sectoral guidances or guidances that apply to everyone. The UK is tricky, as I mentioned, because you would think you might look up Brexit, but apparently Brexit's happened technically. So you have to look up transition. So if you look up transition in gov.uk, and there's guidance and regulation. So if you click into the guidance and regulation, there's about 800 notes there. And it's very, very helpful because it says what the position would be, because a lot of this is just falling back into what the rules would be if you're in a third country. But because the UK isn't as restricted, it's given quite a lot of concessions. So you very much in your particular sector and the particular product concern should look at the guidance that's there.
Transitions.gov.uk.
Well, it's .gov.uk is kind of a master government site. But if you go into transition, you'll find the page jumping out at you, and then the bottom is guidance and regulation, and that's where you'll find the 800 guidance notes on it.
Okay, I might merge two questions. One we already have, and one that I see has just come in to us live. So the question we have already is, if our supplier in Europe is selling goods to us and those goods transit through the UK, do we have to do anything, or is it up to our supplier to arrange the customs paperwork for those goods transiting through the UK? And the one that's come in is, who's going to calculate the VAT on imports coming into Ireland from the UK? Will a customs agent be responsible for this? I suppose both questions are, do you as the ultimate importer have to worry about declaring the VAT, or is it your ultimate supplier in Europe? And who's going to calculate the VAT on imports?
Well, there's a couple of different questions there. I mean, in terms of who's responsible, the issue Derek mentioned is absolutely critical. That depends on your contract, in terms of who's responsible for bringing the transit through the UK. Clearly, if goods move through the UK, they go through a customs-like process. They're under customs controls, and there's no duties, but you have to follow quite a bit of procedure and get a transit guarantee. In terms of that, if you're a business, generally the expectation, and the government's, I think, passed this legislation, is that you will have postponed accounting. So if you're entitled to charge VAT on all your sales, then you should in principle be entitled to import free of VAT. One of the biggest problems that looked like happening when Brexit started would be that VAT is normally paid at the exact point of import. Now, if you're selling to customers or people who don't have full VAT recovery, or people who aren't VAT registered, then VAT is payable as part of the import process. So I can't see how your foreign supplier is going to pay the VAT unless they have some kind of entity here or some kind of establishment here that then sells on to you. So really VAT is a big issue for selling to customers and consumers at that point, at the point of entry. But if you're a business to business with 100% VAT recovery, postponed VAT accounting looks like coming in, which will look like what the position is now on B2B sales within Europe. It'll be technically different, but the net effect will be the same.
So broadly speaking, the customs arrangement for stuff coming in from Europe via the UK would be up to the contract you have with that supplier as to who arranges that, and VAT broadly speaking, will be up to you to work out your arrangements. Yeah. Any advice on the UK as a land bridge and what the implications may be?
Just looking at the land bridge, and there's a lot of commentary on that at the moment, Vincent. The land bridge will remain a really important piece of transport infrastructure in getting to and from Europe. Your last question also touched on transit documents, and transit documents are going to become really important. So goods moving from Europe, coming through the UK and coming into Ireland, how do we maintain the European status of the goods? We put them under what's called the customs authorization called the transit, a T2 document, and that T2 document allows it. The UK have signed the International Transit Convention, so they're part of that, and it allows the goods to move through the UK without losing their EU status. They turn up in Dublin and effectively they're back in free circulation again. There's also a process which a lot of the major manufacturing companies and importers have looked at in bringing the clearance process away from the border. So moving the goods in under transit to their customs warehouse, to their temporary storage facility, as it's called, and clearing the goods there. So again, it just keeps the flow moving and keeps the goods moving. So there's a number of different customs authorizations there, depending on what your business is and what your trade is, that are worth looking at.
So in principle, the customs arrangements for goods transiting through the UK to Ireland from Europe should be relatively straightforward. The issue may arise in just literally congestion at the ports.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's been a really proactive approach from both Revenue and Dublin Port and Russell Airport to try and encourage people to clear away from the ports so trucks can just transit through and move through. And that's something that's definitely worth looking at and looking for those customs authorizations to be able to do that. Okay,
we have just passed 12 o'clock, so I think we'll just maybe take time for one or two more questions that have come in, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll get Neil to wrap it up for us. But should we direct our UK suppliers to charge us VAT and tariffs, if applicable, from January 1st? So should we direct our UK suppliers? This person obviously has UK suppliers. Should he direct them to charge VAT and tariffs, if applicable, from January 1st?
I think
will that happen automatically?
VAT rules will say what has to happen. I mean, the VAT rules are quite subtle, and you might need advice in particular circumstances, but you can't choose the position. I say generally the position with VAT is, the simple position is that when you bring goods in, you pay VAT at the point of import, but for business to business sellers, you should be able to postpone that, much as it is at present, but you don't have a lot of choice about how VAT works with goods. It's payable at the point of import. B2B, you can postpone it. So it's not a matter of choice. In terms of them absorbing the economic cost, that's a contract matter for your terms of sale. I mean, if the people in the UK, if the business in the UK is selling to consumers here, that's quite different. But generally, VAT laws tell you what you have to do, and there's very little choice about it.
Okay, and we'll finish up perhaps with this one. And I think, again, I know the answer, but it's obviously a specific issue for somebody out there tuning into us. Will UK manufactured wallpapers and furnishing fabrics be subject to tariffs? That's quite a specific question. I don't know whether
it's a little bit broad, and the reason it's a little bit broad is that when you look at furnishings, they can be chairs, they can be tables, they can be made of metal, they can be made of sofas, and all of them will have different commodity codes, and there in turn they will have potentially different tariffs. So in the event that of a no trade, off the top of my head, I know soft furnishings, so a couch, upholstered couch, etc., is 0% duty. But the likes of, pottery, picture frames, that type of thing, does attract duty. So really, that's why it's important to tap down into your commodity codes and have an understanding as to what the duty liability might be. Wallpaper, off the top of my head, I'm afraid I don't know, but I suspect there is a low rate of duty on it.
But it's pretty quick, pretty easy to find out, Derek.
Absolutely. Get the commodity codes, and then after that, it's straightforward.
Okay. Well, on that note of encouraging people to find out, because we've got about 70 days left, and regardless of whether there's a skinny trade agreement or not, we are facing a situation with customs and regulatory declarations, which is going to change the whole picture. So on that basis, just go and find out. Take the advice of the people who've joined us today, and I'd like to thank the panelists: Katie Hayward, who may have left us already, Dave Flynn from Skillnet Ireland, Giles O'Neill of the Brexit Unit at Enterprise Ireland, Derek, who's on our screen in front of us and who has been very helpful from Manifest Ireland, and Paul McMahon of McMahon Legal. And again, I recommend Paul's site for people trying to get information on a lot of different fronts about this. Go and get advice now is the advice. And on that note, I'll hand back to Neil.
Thanks very much, Vincent. And actually, before I wrap, because someone did ask the dreaded transit question, Derek, could you? I just want to clarify with you, because we have so many Irish hauliers who currently transit the UK. Just to make a very clear distinction between transit and cabotage. So, an Irish haulier who would typically or used to do cabotage, pick up a load or two or a pallet or two on the way across the UK, across GB, that isn't transit. Am I right in saying? And
yeah, I suppose the simplest way, Neil, is to cabotage refers to the vehicle and transit refers to the goods.
okay.
So two separate entities, one relating to the legal requirements of how many loads, etc., you can pick up in a foreign country, and the other relates to the goods and protecting the status of the goods or moving them under customs control.
But for those, say, groupage businesses who had traditionally stopped off once or twice after getting off in Holyhead, picked up a few pallets, they will not be covered by the Transit Convention. They're not moving under transit.
They can depart Holyhead or Liverpool under transit, and they can bring it to their customs warehouse and do the clearance process in that warehouse.
Okay.
And avoid the clearance, because the difficulty when you have a groupage trailer with 15 consignments on it, one of them for whatever reason has an issue, the whole trailer stops.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much, Derek. To the individual who asked the question on tariffs, I should say that, excuse me, Intertrade Ireland now has a tariff checker that you can interrogate in plain English. So you just chuck in whatever, wallpaper or steel, aluminium, tin cans, whatever, and you can interrogate it in plain English. It used to be an awful lot more difficult. So anyone who has questions on that, I'd just advise you can Google Intertrade Ireland tariff checker and you'll get there. There remains very little for me to do, but to echo Vincent's thanks to the panel, to Vincent himself, and to Katie, Dave, Giles, and Derek and Paul. Many thanks for your contributions this morning. I know as you listen, and I do see more questions popping up on the chat as we go, we will, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send out the link to this webinar, and we will endeavour to cover as many of those questions in the post-webinar Q&A as possible. So look, ladies and gentlemen, the one thing I would really advise you, and I appreciate people's heads are, our timing is unfortunate in that this was long scheduled for a day we did not realize would be the day before a level 5 lockdown pre-COVID, but it is really, really important, whether you're importing from the UK, as a great many SMEs are, or exporting to the UK. Brexit is not going away, and the commercial relationship changes fundamentally on the 1st of January. Obviously, that's not a working day, but the 2nd of January is. And unless you're planning on taking major cost and major aggravation, you really do need to look at what you're doing and get those processes, those procedures, payments and clearances correct before then. Many thanks for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar, and stay tuned to our Brexit page for further details. Thank you all.
Thank you.